The title of this video, The Solution to Every Problem, is based on the fact that the federal government has insinuated itself into every aspect of our lives. Housing, education, the arts, transportation, healthcare, 360-degree coverage. The upside is that if we can make incremental improvements in the professionalism and proficiency of the federal workforce, that can translate into improvements in the lives of many millions of people. This is not the daunting task that others will make it out to be. We have uncontroversial, long-standing practices in the private sector that can be used to improve the governance in the public sector. The aim is to introduce standards to the quality of information warehoused and disseminated by the federal government and to the conduct of government employees as well. This can't be done, however, under the self-policing practices that we have in place today, which have essentially turned transparency and accountability into a slogan bandied about by politicians that really has no meaning. No one gives credence to an internal investigation by one federal employee that clears another federal employee of misconduct or misbehavior. Nowhere outside of the government is self-policing practiced because none of us believe that it would work, and indeed it does not. So if we start with the information deficiencies, it's only logical that this area needs an upgrade, considering the fact that all of our transparency laws have their origin in a pre-computer era, or at least before computers were the default way of communicating. So the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, which was passed in 1966, there was no concept of data quality at that time. So we find ourselves today spending over $700 million per year with 5,600 people administrating FOIA, and they don't have any requirement to give the public accurate information, timely information, consistent information. It can be riddled with errors. They can be caught lying repeatedly to the courts about what information they have and don't have. So when people talk about AI taking over jobs, it's the 5,600 jobs in the FOIA administration that should be next on the list, or at least a substantial number of them. That $700 million budget, that can be reduced by 80 or 90% if we move towards machine learning. The job of the FOIA administrator becomes one of ensuring that the AI bots are redacting information according to whatever set of rules that are laid out, and that information from the various departments is all consistent. You can compare information from the Department of Commerce to the Department of Agriculture or Energy, and then we can completely flip the equation and how we can assess information from the government. Today, we receive a sliver of the information as produced. We only request a sliver of it, and then we receive approximately half of that. A lot of that is even redacted. Journalism would be transformed if we were able to push from 95 to 99% of the data that the government produces and collects out into the public sphere, as would university research. Having a database of that scale that's basically complete and reliable, that would answer questions that we didn't even know to ask. And all of that at a substantial savings to taxpayers. Also, we shouldn't have to rely on whistleblowers to alert us to illegal government programs. There's a way that we can use machine learning to summarize any classified document in a way that doesn't expose diagrams and designs to our enemies, but it does allow us to challenge either the fact that it's classified, or it may alert us to the fact that the government is up to something unlawful and we want to go further than what the FOIA process would allow and use subpoena powers of the courts to figure out whether or not that is an illegal program. So clearly, if you don't have any knowledge that that document exists at all, you don't have any basis for either of those challenges. Benchmarking is another concept that wasn't around in the 1700s, but today the government spends over $7 trillion per year. So it's not too much to ask for them to define for each agency and its staff, what are you meant to accomplish on a monthly, quarterly, and annual basis? Similarly, there has to be some objective definition for what's considered to be an unacceptable level of performance. Anyone who cannot define this does not belong in a management role. For example, we know that the Pentagon hasn't passed an audit in almost 10 years, and that's through Republican and Democratic administrations. If that's not a level of incompetence that should get someone in a leadership position terminated, we need to know what is. Another example, Breonna Taylor, murdered in 2020 based on an illegal search warrant, state level, not federal. But the point is that the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division came in 3 years after she was murdered to do an investigation. Purpose of devolved democracy is to say that we have the data to identify leading indicators, get out in front of problems before they lead to an unnecessary loss of life. At any rate, that investigation found that judges were approving search warrants without any probable cause listed at all, and they were also approving literal Control C, Control V assertions of probable cause by the police. We don't pay judges to blindly approve warrants in violation of the Fourth Amendment. There has to be a way to remove these people who have no interest in abiding by the Constitution and limit the harm to the public. If we want to transition to a world where the government has to comply with data quality and performance standards, it will unfortunately require a constitutional amendment so that politicians are not the last word on oversight. I include judges in that category as well, the Supreme Court being just another cog in the political machine. Fortunately, there is one entity identified in the Constitution that's non-political and we can lean on for this purpose, and that's the jury system, the grand jury and the trial jury or petit jury. Jurors are not placed on the jury because of their political affiliations or as a favor to someone or other. Once the jury's term is over, they simply go back to their normal lives. They don't have any incentive to create a nexus of power and influence for the jury itself. This makes it uniquely positioned to provide that role of impartial oversight that we need. And to this day, California uses a civil grand jury system to audit its municipalities. The difference being these state-level civil grand juries only have the power to investigate and make recommendations. They don't have any enforcement authority, so politicians are free to ignore whatever recommendations they make, and there are no consequences. The devolved part of devolved democracy is proposing that we create a civil grand jury system at the national level, allow regular Americans to terminate the employment or the vendor relationship with people or companies that are competency or compliance outliers. For due process purposes, the civil grand jury system would be broken out along two tracks. The first set of civil grand juries will perform investigations, and the second set would approve or not any recommendations that came out of those investigations. So that the investigations could be as robust and credible as possible, all of the administrative accountability functions that today reside with the bureaucracy, that will report into the civil grand jury system. You would have an Office of Inspector General where the Inspector General could only be fired by the civil grand jury. That would lead to truly independent audits, independent FOIA process and appeals, and a whistleblower protection program that's not designed to intimidate people from coming forward and exposing problems. Recommendations from the investigative civil grand jury will require 2/3 of their members to agree for that to move forward, and then 3/4 of the ratification civil grand jury would have to agree. That will become final without any recourse to the courts because this is a citizen, taxpayer, lack of confidence vote. Keeping in mind that due process is commensurate with the stakes. At the high end, you have someone who's facing a potential loss of life in a capital punishment case. They have an entire slew of protections available to them. And then as you go down that ladder to loss of freedom, loss of property, those protections are going to truncate. And what we're talking about here is asking someone to brush up their resume, go find a job outside of the government, or if you're a company, go find some clients outside of the federal government. This year being the 250th anniversary of America, if the Constitution had effective governance and controls in place, we would have seen evidence of that by now. We see transparency laws that didn't require an army of lawyers. We see deterrence so that government officials were not simply ignoring court orders. You pick the governmental dysfunction, it's pretty much happening unabated. So my only question is, how much longer will it take for us to change the framework instead of cycling out people at the top of the governmental machine and expecting different output? The full text of the proposed changes to the Constitution can be found in the forthcoming book, Devolved Democracy. You can support that effort in the customary ways on YouTube and Blue Sky.